Hi, this is Kendra Mosley with Children in the Fields campaign. Welcome to Live Thursday on this October 29th of 2020. I am joined by Charlotte Tate from Green America. Thank you, Charlotte, for joining us. Today we're going to have a conversation about child labor in our chocolate. And we're doing this with Charlotte because Green America is a nonprofit focused on harnessing economic power, the strength of consumers, investors, businesses, and the marketplace to create a socially just and environmentally sustainable society. They are also our partners on the Child Labor Coalition, and Charlotte is the chair of the cocoa work group within the CLC. And that's why we invited her here today to talk about chocolate. Now, this is an urgent topic, not just because of the approaching candy-heavy holiday, but because there's been some breaking news about the efforts to reduce child labor in the chocolate supply chain, and we're going to talk all about that in a bit. But first, I'll give you a chance to get logged on. I know it takes some time. I'm always hitting the ground running with these things, so I don't want you to miss anything. So I hope you all can get settled, put your headphones in. And while you do that, I just want to let you know this is my last broadcast for Live Thursday. I took on a new role at AFOP as the Director of Workforce Development. So the communications coordinator that will replace me will keep these going in 2021. In the meantime, we're going to take a little break for the next 8 weeks or so, coinciding with all the holidays and all the craziness that brings. During the break, however, if you miss these broadcasts and want to go back and see them again or just catch up on anything that you may have missed, go ahead to our website, afop.org/CIF, and they are all right there for you on the 8th tab. They're also on our YouTube site, and I'll put that in the crawler in a little bit. So I don't have any other announcements, just to thank you all for watching every week. I enjoy it every week, and it's been one really great way during this pandemic to keep us all connected and informed about the really pressing issues for farm workers and especially farm worker children. And it's not ending. We're not getting out of this very quickly like we hoped. So we will keep on doing that. And one thing I also wanted to highlight was that today is a Latina Equal Pay Day. This is the day that represents how much longer Latinas have to work to earn the same amount of money as their non-Hispanic white male counterparts. And there are several important events happening to mark this day and to advocate for better pay for Latinas. So keep an eye on our Facebook page for those updates. And I think that is it. If you're interested in getting our announcements and getting on our mailing list, send your email to our inbox right on here to send us a Facebook message and we'll add you. And okay, so without further ado, I want to introduce Charlotte. She is Green America's Labor Justice Campaigns Director. Her work is centered at the intersection of environmental and labor issues, focused on toxic chemical exposure in apparel, child labor in cocoa, and holding online retailers accountable. She works to educate and mobilize U.S. consumers to advance environmental and labor rights throughout supply chains. So welcome, Charlotte.
Thanks, Kendra, and glad to be here with you all.
So I wanted to start out with just mentioning that the Child Labor Coalition, which Charlotte and I are both a part of, Green America and AFOP are members of the coalition, has been active with the child labor in chocolate from the beginning. And Charlotte is the chair of that work group, especially on cocoa. So at AFOP, we do our best to stay on top of the developments in child labor and cocoa, but Charlotte is the expert. So Charlotte, I want to ask you, how and when did it become clear that child labor was a big problem in the cultivation of cocoa in West Africa?
Yeah, so in 2000, media reports started documenting widespread child labor in cocoa production, which spurred the creation of the Harkin-Engel Protocol. Additionally, in 2003, the US Department of Labor published a study that showed a high prevalence of child labor in cocoa production. So this issue has been well documented, well known, and pervasive for many, many years.
And so the chocolate industry, what was their reaction to the news about the child labor in their supply chain?
Yeah, so when initially the Harkin-Engel Protocol was going to require a label that would indicate to consumers that the chocolate was made without child labor. However, there was a lot of industry pushback on this, which I think answers your question, what did industry feel? And so that has resulted in the Harkin-Engel Protocol being a voluntary, non-binding agreement to reduce child labor. But I haven't been working on cocoa since 2000, but from what I can tell, the industry pushed back on the fact that child labor was so widespread. But there was also the justification that it's just something that happens on family farms. Or I've also seen complete denial from consumer facing brands that they have any responsibility for the raw materials in their supply chain, since maybe they don't own the operations that lower down in their supply chain.
Sounds very familiar, just shoving off responsibility.
And just to add, the conversation has generally moved past this point. We are seeing consumer-facing brands taking up more responsibility for what's happening in their supply chain.
That sounds positive. And the Harkin-Engel Protocol, I wanted to backtrack a little bit because I was going to give a little overview and I didn't do that. But just to let everyone who's watching know who may not know about the Harkin-Engel Protocol, it was signed in fall of 2001, so about exactly 19 years ago, with the objective to eliminate the worst forms of child labor and adult forced labor on cocoa farms in West Africa. And I think it was initially it was introduced as a bill in Congress. Is that right? But then it was signed and witnessed. It became a voluntary agreement, and it was signed and witnessed by the heads of 8 major chocolate companies, and then Senator Harkin, Congressman Engel, and a few other heads of state, including the ambassador of the Côte d'Ivoire. So yeah, I think the crucial point is that it was voluntary, and now we're 19 years down the road. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so how did the Harkin-Engel Protocol propose going about ending the worst forms of child labor in chocolate? And what were the goalposts?
Yeah, so initially there was the commitment that industry, so after they had pulled back on the consumer-facing label, there was a commitment that industry would develop and implement certification, industry-wide certification by 2005. So they missed that goal. And then the protocol was extended. And in 2010, there was the agreement that companies would work to reduce the worst forms of child labor by 70% by 2020. They also missed that goal. Yeah.
So tell me, Green America is active on a lot of different fronts, but especially with chocolate. Can you tell me what Green America has done to try to advance this issue and help eliminate child labor?
Yeah, so we have a corporate-facing campaign on cocoa. This campaign work started in, I believe, 2010, urging Hershey to have their cocoa supply chain be fully fair trade certified. So this year, Hershey got to 100% certification, but unfortunately, it wasn't 100% fair trade certification. But since that Hershey campaign, we've continued to push the chocolate industry to address child labor and also address things like deforestation. That is also widely prevalent in the cocoa growing area of West Africa. So now we are asking for things like for cocoa farmers to be paid a living income, for an end to deforestation, and for where areas that have been deforested to have agroforestry practices implemented. And this would help the cocoa growing communities that their land has been devastated by industry practices. And then we're also, of course, asking for an end to child labor being used in cocoa production.
Sounds like some unfortunately lofty goals because I hope those things can be achieved. But of course, now we know something that we didn't know a year ago. We were hoping for 70, the protocol was aiming for 70% reduction in child labor. What happened in April that gave stakeholders and NGOs a clue that things were not progressing as hoped and that this goal probably would not be reached?
Yeah, so accompanying the Harkin-Engel Protocol, the Department of Labor has funded a series of prevalence studies looking to see if child labor is in fact being reduced. So the final prevalence study came out just a few weeks ago, but we received a leaked version of this report in the spring. And the leaked version, similar to the final version, showed that companies did not meet the goal of reducing child labor by 70%, but it also showed, both the final and the leaked version showed a big increase in children being exposed to pesticides. And I don't think this was a surprise to many people working in this space, but it is always nice to have hard numbers that show that it is the case that it happens in each.
Yes, that is unfortunate. Now, what will happen with the Harkin-Engel Protocol going forward? Was all of that work for nothing? Was there anything that good that came out of it, and what can we build on that?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think there has been some good that has come out of it. So industry, civil society, and governments have learned so much through this process. Of course, it's incredibly disappointing that the goals weren't reached, but industry has made progress in other areas. So we've seen a big jump in traceability and transparency in their supply chains. And from our perspective, if you don't know where your cocoa is coming from, how in the world are you supposed to address things like child labor or deforestation in your supply chain? So the traceability aspect down to the farm level is really important, and that is an area that progress has been made. Additionally, something that at least is surprising to me is there's been growing industry support for mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation. So this would require companies at a certain profit level to disclose certain aspects of their supply chain, do a certain level of due diligence, depending on what the legislation ends up being. And this effort has really grown in the EU, but I'm hoping that it starts to grow in the US as well. Because something we do see in the chocolate industry is there are a few chocolate companies that are doing some work to address child labor and other issues in their supply chains, but since it's not required, there are some companies that are doing very little. And this doesn't create an environment where companies are pushing to go further and further. So hopefully mandatory human rights due diligence legislation would help to even the playing field in that
regard. What are the prospects for passing legislation like that? Is that kind of dependent on how this next election goes?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's pretty dependent on how the election goes. And then just maybe one more thing that we could learn from the Harkin-Engel Protocol. I think that, well, one, it was a really good model of collaboration, having governments and industry and some civil society at the table discussing ways to address child labor. But we've also learned that voluntary commitments won't solve this issue. Unfortunately, human rights issues like child labor cost money to fix. So we need legally binding agreements going forward that require companies to do a certain level to address child labor.
Yeah, it's not as easy as one would hope. Nothing worth doing ever is. And we see this too with agriculture in the United States. It matters to make the public more aware of the issue. That does help. It does matter to change the law. That is a huge thing that we keep pushing for, to change the loopholes in the Fair Labor Standards Act. But then it comes down to a lot of money that's available for enforcement. If it's not enforced, it's just not going to get done. So I did put in the chat a lot of links, and I hope they are all clickable from Green America. So there's a chocolate scorecard, and also a list of alternatives to big name chocolate brands. Um, so I hope you all can see those all right. I'm also going to add something to the screen, but my next question, well, actually, I did want to go back a little bit, and because people may not know exactly what's going on with cocoa in West Africa. What exactly are the child labor abuses and the hazardous work that they are involved in?
Yeah, great. I also wanted to go back to that. So I wanted to discuss a little bit of the findings of the recent report. So the prevalence of child labor in the past decade has increased from 31% to 45% in the past decade. So this is not a good sign. Additionally, of that 45% of children experiencing child labor, 95% are experiencing hazardous child labor. So
Wow.
the things that they're experiencing are using sharp tools, carrying heavy loads, clearing land, or exposure to agrochemicals or pesticides. And the report also found that 24% of the child laborers were being exposed to pesticides. So this was a huge increase, and exposure to pesticides causes lifelong health issues for children. So they're being exposed at a very young age and could be left with health problems that last them the rest of their lives. And additionally, the widespread use of pesticides causes a lot of harm to the land. So it's not only harming the health of children, it's also harming future livelihoods and what resources they have left in their communities. And another finding of the report was that a lot of children are experiencing injuries from the child labor conditions. So 41% of child laborers felt very tired or exhausted. 34% had very bad back pain. 25% felt very sick, and it goes on. So these working conditions are having a really negative impact on children.
That's really unfortunate. And I think a lot of times the reason why children are used in um, various industries is because number one is cheap, and number two, they're not injured yet. They are, the belief is that they have stronger bodies, stronger backs. But that's a misconception because they are still developing. They're actually more at risk. And using them in these hazardous industries especially is really short-sighted because that just creates a greater economic burden for the society as a whole later on down the road because their bodies will break down sooner. They will develop various diseases earlier, and then what? They are no longer a productive member of society. Their healthcare costs shoot up. So it's really in everyone's interest to implement greater safeguards for children and to eliminate these hazardous forms of child labor. It's unfortunate that people can't get on board.
Yeah, and additionally, on top of all that, using children this way for cocoa production makes the industry unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Those children could be future cocoa farmers, and if they're hurt or injured early on, how are they supposed to continue on to be successful cocoa farmers? So exactly. I completely agree. It is in no one's best interest to continue to rely on child laborers. And then another piece of the cocoa industry in West Africa is how little cocoa farmers are paid for their cocoa beans. So on average, cocoa farmers make $1 a day and experience extreme poverty. So when we're looking at ways to address child labor, we also need to consider the income of adult farmers and consider increasing that to a living income so that no one is forced to rely on child labor and they have the means to hire adult labor safely.
Absolutely. And that's another parallel that we can draw to child labor here in the US is we beat that drum constantly. And part of AFOP is to give job training to the adult farm workers because if they don't have a sustainable job, then their kids are going to feel the pressure, either internal or external, either from the employer or from their family, to help bring in more income. And it's going to end up exploiting that child and reducing the family opportunities overall in the future. So it's a hard message to preach because that means that we all have to reach into our pockets and pay more for for something that we might be getting too cheaply right now, but the external costs aren't in anybody's interests. The environment and as well as the society as a whole really need changes to the laws for child labor.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's really hits on a point that I think it's really important to look at this issue and all child labor issues from a holistic lens. So not just looking at narrowly at what we can do to get one child out, but look at the systematic changes that need to happen, such as increasing farmer income. And that was one of the findings of the North report, not the living income piece, but that we need multiple approaches happening at the same time to address this issue.
Do we have, and this is not a question that I had prepared, but are there any bills in the queue that we might be hopeful and want to get behind, or is this all kind of pending and wait till next year and see what might happen with next year's Congress?
It's pending. So I know there are a few bills in the works, but I'm not familiar with the intricate details of the bills. But from my perspective, we would need a federal legislation on this, so that all cocoa or chocolate products that are being imported to the U.S. are impacted by this legislation.
Got it. So no more voluntary protocols. It's got to be a law.
Exactly.
And let me see. Okay, I'm just trying to read through the comments and see if we have any questions. Oh, but I do have. So we're talking about all this because Saturday is Halloween, and I want to put up on the screen a little cheat sheet. So here we go. Hopefully that works. Hang on. There you go. And this is from Green America, and they have all the answers for what consumers can do. If you're not an advocate yourself, if you can't do anything in that area, you can still do something when you go to the grocery store and buy Halloween candy. So here's a cheat sheet, and you might not be able to see it very well, but I'll allow Charlotte to talk more at length about what we can do.
Yeah, so first thing you can do is vote with your dollar, or in other words, create a greater economic demand for ethically made chocolate. So some of the brands listed, or all the brands listed on the graphic that's up on the screen, are prioritize people, workers, and the planet in their business model. So one thing we're finding with the big chocolate companies is they're having to react to this issue, where some of these smaller companies are coming in with a business model that's proactive about addressing child labor, about addressing environmental issues. So I would encourage you to check out some of these brands. Some of them are fair trade certified, some of them are organic, and many of them are available in grocery stores. And if they're not available in grocery stores, you can order all of them online, but they might not get there in time for Halloween.
Yes.
And in addition to shopping from more ethically made chocolate brands, you can take action. So you can sign a petition. We recently launched a petition calling on the 10 largest chocolate companies to address things like child labor, pay cocoa farmers a living income, end deforestation, implement agroforestry, reduce pesticides. And you can also share those petitions with your network. And you can reach out to companies directly. One thing we found through all of our campaigns at Green America is when consumers speak, brands often listen. So I would encourage you, if you care about this issue, or if there are other issues you care about, to reach out directly to these corporations, either through their customer service or write them a letter and let them know that this issue or another issue that you care about is something you hope they prioritize more going forward. And then, of course, one great way to create large-scale behavior change is to talk to your friends and family about either this issue you've learned or other issues in supply chains you care about. Because even though child labor in cocoa has been going on for 20 years, I still find people had no idea that child labor was used to make chocolate. So please share this information with your friends and family as well.
Are there any that you'd like to name and shame?
You can, I think I sent through our scorecard, so you can take a look at our scorecard that we released in the spring of 2020, and we looked at the world's biggest chocolate companies and traders and their policies to address 6 key issues facing the chocolate industry, such as child labor, paying cocoa farmers a living income, deforestation, etc. And the company that received our Rotten Egg Award was Godiva, and then the company that received our Golden Egg Award, so the company that did the best, was Tony's Chocolonely. Though I do want to note we did not survey all of the small brands that are on our Trick or Treat cheat sheet. And then for a recent petition, we're calling on, as I mentioned, the 10 largest chocolate brands, and some of those include Nestle, Hershey's, Mars.
Great. So a question from Reed, and he is the director of the Child Labor Coalition. So thank you, Reed, for joining us. His question is, are the chocolate companies collectively doing enough to combat child labor? And given what we just said, the answer, I would assume, is no.
Yes, the answer is no. Unfortunately, we really haven't seen nearly enough progress on reducing child labor or the worst forms of child labor in West African cocoa. And additionally, a lot of what we talk about is the cocoa in their direct supply chains, but there's this portion of chocolate that comes from indirect supply chains or spot markets, and that cocoa often isn't incorporated in corporations' efforts to reduce child labor. So we need to see stuff like child labor monitoring and remediation systems applied to 100% of chocolate cocoa that is grown and produced. So the answer to Reed's question is no, they have not done nearly enough.
We also have a comment from Vicki Walker. She says, programs that reach remote cocoa farmers in the informal sector also need to be reached through extension and remediation. I think that's what you were just talking about.
Yes, exactly. Vicki is right. We need to see these efforts applied across the board to both formal and informal markets.
I put Green America's handle up on the crawler, so very easy to find. And please go there for more information about their initiatives, and especially the child labor in cocoa. Also, I want to highlight the Child Labor Coalition, and I'll put that up here real quick. That is Facebook's handle. Hang on. And then Twitter is slightly different. There we go. And the Child Labor Coalition is very active on all things child labor, domestic and international. So Reed and all the members of the coalition are constantly putting out more information, more research, and more press releases about breaking news on all things child labor. So also a useful website is stopchildlabor.org, and I'm going to put that in the chat so that you all may avail yourselves of the resources on that website. And of course, Children in the Fields campaign, we focus primarily on domestic child labor because, like as Charlotte said, even my friends and family who know that I work at AFOP, I'm constantly educating them on the fact that there's still child labor in the US, and it's just not known. And so the more work we can do to educate your friends and family, let them know, hey, we still have work to do. Our work is not done, and in fact, we are sliding backwards. Judging by this NORC report, it's not getting better; it's actually getting worse. And especially with COVID-19, the concern is, and this has been raised by Kailash Satyarthi from India, and he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and he's saying, we have more children now in child labor because families are out of work, and when families are out of work, the pressure for the children to work and help raise that family income only increases. So this is very important to keep focusing on and keep your eyes on as we go into the winter. In the Northern Hemisphere at least, things won't get any better. I think farm workers especially are going to be out of work during the off season, and there's a lot of concern that about them even getting through the winter. So I'm sorry for the bad news. There's really no good news to talk about, but we can't shy away from it. Charlotte, do you have anything else to add? I don't think we have any other questions, but any other comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, maybe just to touch on COVID-19 in the cocoa sector. So, granted, it was a small sample size, but research on the first few months of COVID showed an increase of nearly 20%, if not more than 20%, in child labor in cocoa growing areas of West Africa. So, exactly what you said, like COVID-19 creates many more risks for child laborers. It makes it could cause big increases in child labor. So it's important to talk about these issues. So hopefully we're able to change the situation, both domestically and internationally.
And I want to recognize your hard work and the Child Labor Coalition's hard work in making progress on this. If we didn't have advocacy groups like you all and coalitions like the Child Labor Coalition, we might not even know about it. Thank goodness for journalists also who publicize the issue. We couldn't do it without them. So support your local paper to plug for them as well. They're not paid enough for the work that they do. It's essential work. And I just want to also recognize all of the farm workers and all the farm worker children who are having a hard time right now and who are experiencing high rates of infection of COVID-19. I want to encourage you all to go out and get tested if you have any kind of symptoms. Fortunately, testing is a little easier to obtain, especially for farm workers. The migrant clinics will have testing kits available. Hopefully there's one in your area, and hopefully you're able to get yourself to one. That is always a challenge with farm work because you're working 7 days a week and you don't ever get any time off. But if you are able to go and get tested, please do so. And my last little plug, I guess, is for Latina Equal Pay Day. Again, Justice for Migrant Women is leading the charge on that today. So please attend those events. And I think if there's nothing else, I want to thank Charlotte so very much for joining us today. It was
thank you, Kendra, for having me. It was great to speak with you.
And thank you to all of our audience members for watching. Again, you can find the video later on our website, efop.org/CIF. Thanks so much. And Charlotte, thank you. Bye.